Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Carly, and on this channel we talk about how to be more conscious creative leaders through the age of human disruption. And in this video I wanted to take a moment to talk about 5 different layers of, there are many, but I just want to kind of bucket out 5 different layers of the self. And we're going to be looking at the conscious self and the unconscious self as we move in our as we come closer to understanding and truly embodying what unity consciousness means and how we find it within the self. But first, I wanted to go through these different layers so that we can kind of understand how the journey to unity consciousness is a journey into an understanding. We have to find it through going deep into our own individuality, into our own unique experience. And through that inner individual journey, we arrive at consciousness as a connected source consciousness and a clearer, more embodied understanding of unity consciousness. In today's world, there's a lot of conversation around, we are one, oneness, unity consciousness, but it's very externally focused. It skips this entire journey of understanding how we come to that, how we explore and arrive at the realization of unity through that individual path. So the 5 layers that I wanted to review, not go too much detail into, simply in this video, I'm just going to mention them, give a brief summary, and just bringing our awareness to these different layers helps us to dive deeper, to explore and get to the next layer, right? To go deeper and deeper and deeper into the self. So the first, some of this probably won't be new, but it's still just try to, again, just bringing the awareness to these buckets. So the first one that I want to look at is kind of like automatic programming. That would be like the observational self. So that's when, we as human beings, as we're being conditioned, and we mimic and we reflect whatever we are exposed to around us. It's very automatic. There's no reflection, no real mental work involved. It's more energetic and behavioral. So my mom behaves this way, I'm going to behave a similar way, right? My teacher, my culture, it has a lot more to do with our environment, our immediate exposure to environment, and what we reflect from that environment. Again, very automatic. All of these layers are activated at the same time, by the way. It's not a matter of the fact that I don't think that anyone is completely disconnected from any of these layers. But through awareness, we can understand more where maybe there's some tension, some blocks, and things to work on. So that first layer is automatic. It's really more energetic, emotional mirroring that's happening, observational sort of unconscious self. Then we move into the learned self. The learned self is more related to storytelling and the power of storytelling. Storytelling is incredibly powerful, and this is what we see kind of in the superficial world, right? So it's the narrative that we're born into. We can observe cultural behavior around us and reflect that, mimic that behavior. But then we learn the cultural narrative that holds together that behavior. And that has an emotional connection to the next layer, but also it's highly logical. Storytelling is actually all about containing information, which is why, as a storyteller myself, I believe in empowering stories and disempowering stories, because it's how we make sense of the world. So the best way to actually control people, to control yourself, to control another, is through the use of story, because it integrates information in a sense-making way that works for our left side of the brain and activates the heart, well, not the true heart, but our emotional and more of our kind of our trauma self, which is the third layer. So first layer, observational, energetic, behavioral mirroring that's happening just based on whatever environment you were born into. whatever your family system was like, right? And there's not a lot of reflection that's happening. It's pretty automatic. Then we have learned. Those are the stories you were told. The stories you were told, whether it's within your family, within your culture, within the movie and kind of the pop culture scene that you have been exposed to. So you'll find that people that have been exposed to the same stories tend to hold those stories and that kind of structure over their life. And then below that, so observational, learned self also includes our education system and how that's actually where most of the storytelling in the narrative is created, right? Our understanding of history, our understanding of what science knows, what science doesn't know. All of this is very easily contained within an institutional educational structure, which some could say is for the good, so that we all have a similar basis of information. But maybe just sit with that and spend some time really thinking about who holds that information and what, and whether there's really a benefit to having a consensus structure on the learned educational narrative. Okay, and then the third one is the unconscious self, the ego self, and so the first two can be a little bit more conscious. The ego self is much more involved with or based on trauma, based on the core wound of trauma, which really all wounds kind of breed and diverge from the original wound of abandonment, the feeling of separation, the desire to not be separate. And so this trauma wound puts us unconsciously in the state of desire, but oftentimes kind of the superficial desires, these things that need to be met outside of you before you can find inner peace. And as like Eckhart Tolle would call the pain body, all of this is within the trauma self. And so our trauma self, all of us, whether or not we think we have experienced trauma, in various degrees, absolutely have. And when we don't address that trauma within us, then we are unconsciously building an ego self, a personality on top of that wounding, right? On top of that wounding. So that trauma self, that pain body, builds an entire defense mechanism, an entire narrative to keep itself safe from further pain. The trauma self does not like to be vulnerable. The trauma self is looking to, even when it looks for love, it wants to love, it wants to attach, it wants to feel safe. It wants to make sure that it's not going to be abandoned. So it's the trauma self that creates a lot of the codependent sort of dynamics in our world and within ourselves. So if we don't have, but the trauma self we can find through deep inner reflection, right? Through going into, again, our inner authority and facing our hurt aspects that cause us to live in a more hurt perception of the world and create these codependent dynamics in order to unconsciously keep us safe from further pain. So the trauma self, the learned self, and the observational self are kind of all working together to form this ego identity that is very obsessed with its separate self, that's very obsessed with a logical understanding of the world, that wants to belong within a consensus narrative, that wants to make sure that it is safe. And it is operating, until we really bring awareness to our trauma, it is operating, this entire structure of the learned self and the observational self is operating on this unconscious trauma self. And so until awareness is brought to and healed at that level, we really can't fully access. We are these other layers that I'm going to talk about are still active within us, but it's very hard for our awareness to really start to understand and explore these other parts, because in a way the ego self is protecting itself from going deeper. So the next layer after the trauma self, then I would talk about the essence self. And that is the individual or soul narrative, the true essence of your individual self that fits within a larger construct that is true to you. That's a lot of what astrology looks at, human design looks at. A lot of these systems that we have created in the esoteric or the New Age world, or I mean, astrology is ancient. They're looking at more of this karma, dharma, right? Energetically, what you are born into and what you are here to experience at a much deeper level. But we really can't go into that part of ourselves because it's, as long as that trauma, the observational and the learned self is still operating in the ego structure on top of it. Think of it as like a guardian with all of this, right, this armor that won't let you go into the depths of what true, right, desire would be. So instead of, if your intuition or your desire is to experience a certain kind of life, or maybe is taking you to, I don't know, it's a certain experience. You're drawn to go to a certain place in the world, and you don't really understand why. And it doesn't matter if you have the money to do it or you don't. You're going to respect that impulse within you that's saying there's something for you to explore here. But if the ego self is still activated and it hasn't really been worked on, then it's always going to still be trying to meet its needs externally. It's going to make it about money. It's going to make it about maybe you're going to meet the love of your life. Maybe you're going to write these outer things that it wants, because the trauma self still has not been fully worked through. And so the inner desire of the soul, of the essence of who you are, is confused and still getting hijacked by this ego self that's on top of it. And as long as that's happening, there's like a it's like a right, like a static almost. So that connection to the true essence self is not purified yet, because there's still a pain body that's very active, that doesn't have a lot of awareness or observational and learned conditioning that's on top of it, that's not allowing you to access and fully be present with that essence exploration of the self. So the unconscious soul essence, whatever you want to call it, there are many names, and I won't even say that it's not make it about being exact. Just, again, feel into these different layers. Below, at the deepest core level of self, is the awakening of consciousness as a whole, right? That you are nothing but a fractal of something else. And this deep connection to everything around you, everyone around you, as a piece of yourself, you as a piece of them. Right? And so this unity consciousness and the self, as we go down through the layers, observational, learned, ego trauma, essence self, we arrive at the truth, which is there is no self really. It's just, we have to find that journey, though, of course, within ourselves. So I'm not going to describe this last layer too much, because I think it's important that we arrive there on our own. And I truly believe that when we begin that inner journey and bring awareness to each of these levels and clear what needs to be cleared, We all arrive at the same place, but we arrive there truthfully, genuinely. And that allows us to really realize the power of unity consciousness and understanding that your essence self is a piece of that unity consciousness. So it's important that we're not in a battle over the self versus the collective, or individuality, versus we are one, I am versus we are. They are one of the same. They are one of the same, and one of the ways that we respect that unity is by understanding that I am a piece of the whole, like a flock of birds, like how a natural ecosystem works, right? An ecosystem is one. It's all working. A natural ecosystem is working together to create something that can sustain life. But it can only do that when each piece of the ecosystem is truly aligned to what it is, right? When this tree is operating, how this tree is meant to, is truly intended to operate. There's nothing else on these other layers, and that's the difference between human and a lot of other parts of consciousness, is that we have these other things, these other parts of the ego self, which is related to free will, that can easily be hijacked, that we can lose touch with our true essence. We have to choose to come back to our true essence, to recognize what ecosystem we are part of, our interdependency, and what our role is, not our hierarchy. There is a natural hierarchy, but it's not like a pyramid hierarchy where there's then we have this idea of better than or worse than. No, you just simply have to come into the true essence of you. And by respecting that true essence and connecting more deeply to the interdependencies and the unity consciousness that lies underneath that, then the magic happens. The magic happens where we really begin to understand what unity consciousness means within the self, as something that is at once individual and at once everything else. So the journey to the journey to the dissolving of the self into unity consciousness is a journey into the individual self, is a journey into understanding these different layers. You must look at what parts of you continue to be, because as we awaken, also as we're on these journeys, it never stops. It never stops, and there are always things that happen that can kind of pull us back into old habits, reactivate traumas that we thought we had released. And so, humility really allows us to continue to cycle through and understand that we are constantly cleansing and reviewing what is observed, what is learned, what is trauma, what is the true essence, what is the unity consciousness that brings it all together, and transforming and alchemizing that identity self, right, in this really beautiful way, by embracing the constant transformation through the awareness of these different levels of self that are always interacting, because they don't just disappear, they're always interacting with each other. All of these parts of you in some way are active. As we become more and more connected to the truth, to the unity consciousness, the observational and the learned and the trauma self become less, they aren't as powerful, right? They lose their control over you. But they're never fully gone as long as we're in form. They're never fully gone. So I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that regularly, that as long as we are here in form, that form is still something that we need to review regularly. That is the end of this video. I hope that bringing some awareness to these 5 different layers of self can encourage you to look at yourself in different ways, and again, be a motivator to go on the path of inner authority through a deep evaluation of what the self really means and all the different layers that make up your manifestation, your realization of consciousness. Love and strength.